In the second
Right.
parable, which is chapters 45 through 57, we see focus shift to this Messiah figure that you mentioned, who's the one that judges sinners. And the interesting thing is that we're always taught in church that no Jew ever at any time ever really understood who the Messiah would be or what he would be doing or anything about him, and it was a total mystery until Jesus came. But the book of Enoch seems to tell a much different story, as do much of the Dead Sea Scrolls. What was the expectation of the Messiah within different Jewish factions just before the time of Christ? And why did the Dead Sea Scrolls seem to paint a picture of the Messiah that seems really similar to Jesus?
Yeah, because there were multiple sects of Judaism, not everybody's expectations were identical. So that's the first thing out of the gate, because they're all looking at the same source. They're looking at the Hebrew Bible, and they're looking at a mass of data points. And so the question is, okay, we've got all this scattered information about this deliverer guy, the servant, Mashiach, all these different terms. So how do we put this together and create a profile? And we know, having read the New Testament, that the New Testament writers will use Old Testament passages in ways that are quite unexpected to us. And what people don't realize is that some of those ways would have been quite unexpected to certain sects of Judaism at the time. But there were other sects of Judaism that really tracked on it. It's a little bit of a convoluted way of saying this. You're right that, and it's typically Christmas or Easter. We get treated to the History Channel special, the Christ of faith versus the Jesus of history, these specials basically that are so woefully underinformed. But they're designed to create this hermeneutic of suspicion that the Jesus of the Gospels, that isn't what was described in the Old Testament. So this stuff that Christians believe must be made up later. That's where it's going with this. The magazines on the impulse shelf, the whole bit. There's this Jesus of history, and then there's the Christ that the church made up, But Enoch and other books, but especially Enoch, and especially this section, really defies that. You can't coherently say things like the interpretive spin that the New Testament writers have on this or that passage is totally unique and made up, because it's not. You can find all of their trajectories somewhere in Second Temple Judaism. We might have one strand that tracked on one or two, and then another strand doesn't track on those two, but they track on another one here. So the New Testament writers, they're going to align with different Jewish outlooks. And the one where you get the most hits, as it were, is the Enochian trajectory, the Enochian strand here, and some of the most important stuff like pre-existence. If you think the Messiah was around before there was a world, well, then the chances are pretty high that you're looking at a divine being here. How else can you parse that? And that's one of those things that, this is something that the church invented later. I was on an interview yesterday, and I said, look, all the Watcher Genesis 6 stuff, that gets all the press, okay? But if there's one passage in Enoch that is of value for Christians, it's this one. And it's 1 Enoch 48. So it's the Son of Man. So in that place, Enoch says, I saw the fountain of righteousness, which was inexhaustible, and around it were many fountains of wisdom. So he's having this vision of the dwelling of God. And all the thirsty drank of them and were filled with wisdom, and their dwellings were with the righteous and holy and elect. And at that hour, that Son of Man was named in the presence of the Lord of spirits, God, and his name before the head of days. Again, that's very similar to Ancient of Days. Verse 3, yea, before the sun and the signs were created, before the stars of heaven were made, his name was named before the Lord of spirits. So essentially the Son of Man is tasked really at the dawn of creation. So there you go. I mean, Son of Man is the title used most of the time in Enoch for the Messiah figure. And it's also, Jesus' favorite title for himself. So think of it this way. You talked about eschatology before. Everybody had their own eschatological system. And the one that at Qumran, the Essenes, is the only one that sort of fits the window into which Jesus was born, which is really interesting because they believed in 100 cycles of Jubilees, 4,900 years, and they did their math, based on that with a 364-day calendar. And it has this window, from like 10 BC to 6 AD or something like that, where the Messiah was supposed to happen. So if you're out there in the desert, you're thinking this, and all of a sudden you hear about this guy, Jesus, and you hear about the miracles, and you hear like when he was born, and you just hear stuff that people are saying about him, you're probably thinking, maybe we were right. When's my day off? I got to go hear this guy. Can I have a hall pass out of the desert because I need to go check this guy out? And there are a number of things about the Qumran lifestyle and their theology and again, their reverence for Enoch and the content of Enoch that leads a number of scholars to wonder that it seems reasonable to think that a lot of the people who would have been of this community would have become Jesus followers because of all these different things. Because he's out there, you got to go hear this guy. You know what his favorite title for himself is? Son of Man. Isn't that funny? If you're the guy from Qumran, you're probably sitting there thinking, that's not really funny. In fact, it's a little scary because, like, if this is the guy, again, we're expecting we're all doomed here. Or whose side are we on? Because you're expecting that this messianic arrival, and again, you're thinking Day of the Lord. That's what you're thinking, which isn't terribly comforting because of all the, it's the apocalypse, it's judgment and whatnot. So I find it really hard to believe that if you're somebody who had this theology, again, that's reflected in Enoch, and this is the community that revered Enoch and took care of a lot of these texts, that when you hear this stuff, you just conclude, can't be him. I would think the exact opposite is true, that it's like, holy cow, maybe we're right, because again, their whole eschatological system and just the messianic stuff in the book, they're going to know this material. And it's going to, at the very least, draw attention. So the idea that this is all post-Christian invention, the divine elements with the Messiah, people who claim that have never read 1 Enoch 48 and other passages in the book, and frankly, other things in other books. It's like, you might as well just put a disclaimer on your show that says, we're hopelessly uninformed and ignorant. Please watch our show. Because the claims just don't match the data. But again, they're not interested in data. They're interested in driving this wedge, between the quote-unquote Jesus of history and the Christ of faith, because that just serves a greater agenda.